I've never studied economics in depth. I guess the way I think about it is basically every pro market argument I've ever heard has sounded really good, and every argument against markets has tended to sound bad. And so it sort of makes it hard for me to investigate any particular question. And so, but you sort of come to like a conclusion that's similar to this. You have one of your pieces is about the raising the minimum wage, and then you go through and you go through some graphs and tables and other people's work, and then at some point you say my priors are just very, very hard and are very, very strong in the favor of that raising the price of labor will decrease decrease the demand for labor, and economics is not good enough to overcome that prior. And if that's I was reading that and I'm like, if that's the case, why study economics? We have the prior that markets are good, and very rarely do we have research that can overcome that prior. I mean, does that indicate that maybe there's not that much return to actually studying the specifics in most cases?
So I would say no. I mean, I think what I actually said there was I have a very strong prior that every demand curve will have a negative slope. So that is the first part. So it's not specifically labor. It's just for any particular good that no one has ever written a paper on. Probably no one has ever written a paper about what the shape of the demand for asparagus curve. And I'll say I don't need to have any paper to start off with a strong view that actually has the normal negative slope. In terms of how much you can change your mind, I'm very willing to say, look, you start with a strong prior, you can still move in a marginal direction, but yeah, it's probably not going to be very much given the quality of the work. Although I think in that same piece, I also go over the evidence that exists and say, look, there are multiple bodies of evidence that are relevant. And yes, I say I put a lot more weight on a larger body of evidence that is very closely related in terms of relevance, even though we don't market it this way. For example, there's a large body of work on European unemployment, blaming European unemployment on European labor market regulation. All right. Then you have a separate literature on the effects of the minimum wage. Right. And most people work on the minimum wage will just say that work on European labor market regulation is just a separate literature. You can't go and use that evidence here to go and weigh in on this question. And my reaction is, well, of course I can. It's all part of the same body. It's all empirical work. It's related. And if you're going to say, no, you can't generalize from European labor markets in general to low-skilled labor markets in America, it's well, if you're going to say that, then you can't generalize from New Jersey to Florida, or you can't generalize from 1990 to 2020. So what are you talking about? If you really are going to be so unwilling to take evidence from one area and apply it to another, then really what's the point of doing this? So that's where I would really say there's not much point of doing the work if you don't think that it has broader relevance, or what researchers call external validity. External validity, this is where you have the most ironclad experiment, but is this close enough to anything in the real world that we should care?
Yeah, I think that's right. So you could come to that conclusion that in most cases external validity is not that strong. But yeah, so I guess you just have to have you have to have a prior here, and then that determines so much. And I think I'm glad you're sort of upfront about that. But you have, I think, very interesting argument against the minimum wage that I hadn't heard before, which is the unique harm of unemployment, right?
Oh yeah.
So basically, what the minimum wage people say is, we want to raise the wage from some number of workers from whatever $12 to $15, and they're a little bit better off. But if the cost is more unemployment, the unemployment is a unique evil that goes beyond, just having a slightly lower wage. Can you talk about sort of the harms of unemployment?
Right. So the background for this is there's actually a lot of economists who say, look, sure, the minimum wage does reduce employment somewhat, but it also raises wages. And if we go and do cost benefit analysis, we see the total amount of extra money that is transferred to workers exceeds the loss due to the higher wages, exceeds the loss from the unemployment. And the unemployment's not a big deal anyway, because we'll just give those guys some welfare or unemployment checks and they're going to be fine. Right. And my response to this is, if you go over psychology and happiness research, one of the strongest findings is that unemployment per se causes great misery, even if you have a full adjustment for income. In other words, the loss of income from losing a job is not the main reason why unemployed people are unhappy. It's more of a sense of meaninglessness and uselessness and just not having anything to do or any place to go. For me, COVID really drew this home because, of course, officially I was still fully employed. I never didn't have any pay cut during COVID. And yet I had this feeling of meaninglessness and just having no place in society anymore because my office is closed. I don't see anyone anymore. Some people seems like the internet alone, that's enough for them. But for me, when
Yeah,
I was not
that's my
actually,
life. Yeah.
yeah, but for me, not seeing and interacting with real people, like it was just like I was all by myself, and it was very distressing for me. So I really could, I could already empathize with how it's really feels bad to be unemployed, but when it happens to you, this is like, wow, this is happening to me now. And now I have this personal firsthand experience with the meaninglessness of just having no place and not being part of anything anymore. Very painful, right? So anyway, empirical research on unemployment has usually said that the loss to happiness from unemployment is comparable to several times your actual earnings. What this means then is that and by the way, what's really fascinating to me. Normally, people think of this as a left wing point. They normally think it's a left wing point to say that unemployment per se is bad, and we need to take this problem really seriously. And yet, somehow in the minimum wage literature, they totally forget this, or maybe never heard it. And I say, yeah, really, it is much better for human flourishing for wages to be lower, and it'd be really easy to get a job than to push wages up and possibly push the net income of workers up. And even if you could go and give everyone who lost their job compensation so they don't ever need to work again, this is just not a good life for them. It's just something where it really feels terrible for people. Much better if they just have really any old job rather than nothing.
Yeah. Does this, I mean, this must vary. I think about like sort of residential patterns. So I think losing your job and you live in a suburb is probably, it's easier to get disconnected from people than if you live in a city. If you have a big family versus if you have
Mm-hmm.
no family. I mean, I know people from traditional societies who are happy to, immigrants and other people who are happy to just sort of visit relatives and family all day. It seems like it would be like in a sort of American context where we're often in suburbs, we're often far away from other people physically, and we often don't have large families, that this would be, particularly bad.
I think the European results were quite similar, but I mean, of course, you can say a lot of Europeans, they've got small families. I think there was actually at least one paper saying that if sort of your whole social group becomes unemployed, like in a British mining town, after they close down the coal mine, then maybe you don't feel this sense of meaninglessness because basically you and all your unemployed buddies just go to the pub and hang out every day. I mean, even that, I think you can get a sense of it would get old after a while, and the idea of, well, like we're a bunch of guys, we hang out, but what do we really do? What do we contribute? What are we part of? Or we're part of a group of guys that drinks beer together every day while we receive welfare checks. Doesn't seem like a very satisfying life.
Yeah. Have you ever written applying this idea about the evils of unemployment to UBI? I think I might have seen a blog post like that.
I'm trying to remember whether I did that specifically. I did write a piece just called "The Grave Evil of Unemployment," criticizing other free market economists for saying that unemployment isn't that bad. And I feel like it's terrible. Right? This was during the Great Recession. There actually were a lot of people that I knew, friends, just saying, "Oh well, what's the big deal? People get like a vacation. There's like extended unemployment benefits." I'm like what a strange and psychologically foolish view to think that someone who's lost their job and is doing fine just because they're getting this money, and especially because there's so much insight that free market economics has on how we can get unemployment down and keep it down. Really, just all of the government regulations that myopically try to push wages up as if that's going to be a free lunch, and just to keep pushing that. Right. And of course, you and I also know in the United States, probably one of the big issues is discrimination law, right? Where people are nervous to hire someone that might sue them. Right. And then the people that are well protected by discrimination law probably actually have more trouble finding a job because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, the so labor, it seems like I've worked normal jobs like as a teenager. I worked in like restaurants and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean it seems like I think that a lot of people would like there's flexibility. Like I really hate one thing that gets to me, because so the flexibility is so important because people can have all kinds of preferences, right? If the
Mhm.
only job available is like, a minimum wage and, you have to work 35 hours a week, like somebody might, find that, miserable. And if you
Mhm.
give people like the odd, that they just want to get out of the house and do stuff and they want to work 10 hours a week for $3 an hour, some token
Mhm.
amount, like that's illegal. And I think about like these people who complain about like the gig economy, and it's like, oh,
Mhm.
it's bad because you set your, the pay is not that bad, when you look at it compared to a lot of other things, but it's like it's, people just sort of see it as bad because it's not like, 9 to 5 in an office and clocking in and all that other stuff. And it's like,
And
no,
also
like
gets
this
around a
is,
lot of stupid regulation.
yeah, yeah, it does get a lot of,
Hence
and that's what they
California
don't like
trying
about
to
it.
treat Uber drivers as if they're employees. I mean, and this is where, of course, there's the general absurdity of this distinction between the employee and the independent contractor. And look, it's all just semantics anyway. But California really trying to regulate it to ensure that you can't escape regulation just by calling yourself self-employed.
Yeah, it's amazing. I wonder how much of our sort of economic sort of strength and progress can be attributed to sort of innovation in the private sector to get around stupid government regulations. Because this is just a very obvious case where a lot of things gravitated towards this contractor economy, which was
Mhm.
just easier to hire and fire, and it's less regulated than
Oh
the
yes, I mean,
normal
striking
economy.
especially how even universities, with all their bleeding hearts, still will standardly outsource their janitorial services and other jobs like that. And in this way, they don't have to get involved and they don't have to get their hands dirty with actually paying workers low wages. Right? No, no, no. This is a contract with someone else. Whatever they do is their business. It's nothing to do with me. Right? And but like typical kind of thing where if anyone else did it, then people in universities would be at minimum tut-tutting or maybe blowing their minds over it, whereas they do it themselves and don't seem to have any problem with it. Because how could you criticize us? We're so wonderful.